give ourselves probably about 5 more minutes before we get started to allow more people to roll in. So sit tight. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our second workshop. Today we're going to be talking about applying to medical school. For those of us who are joining us for the first time, we're Polynesians in medicine. We're a group of medical students across the United States, and also interns and residents and other physicians whose goal and mission is to just increase Polynesian representation in the medical field. And so we hope that by conducting these workshops, we're helping, address some of those barriers for our Polynesian pre-med students, so that we can see more success in their journey. So today we're specifically going to be focusing on applying to medical school, and based off of the responses that we got from the registration, it looks like a lot of people are still in their prereq stage. So I think this will be a really good presentation just to kind of give you a broad stroke overview of kind of what to expect and what to plan for. There's a lot that goes into applying to medical school, so we're not going to get into the nitty-gritty details. But we'll definitely be providing some resources for you to reference and read up on if you have any more questions regarding some of these sections. So we'll do a brief slide deck or presentation, and then we'll answer some of your guys' questions at the end. So if during the workshop you have questions, feel free to just drop them in the chat, and then we'll collect them and then we'll start addressing them at the end. But so let us just get through the slide deck first so that we can cover all the information, since there's quite a bit to get through. But before we get started, we'll go ahead and do some brief introductions. It looks like we have a small group today, so if you guys are comfortable, I would like for some of whoever's comfortable to kind of just share your name, where you're from, what school you're attending, and whether or not you're applying this year or kind of still in your prereq stage. So we'll go ahead and get started. My name's Kenny Lasitani. I'm a fourth-year medical student at UC San Diego School of Medicine. I'm currently on a research year and I'm interested in internal medicine and specializing in GI and hepatology. Ciala, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Ciala Dialpa. I am a second-year medical student at the University of Utah School of Medicine, and I'm interested in primary care. So internal med, family med, med peds are kind of what I'm thinking. So happy to be here. And Piwati?
I'm Piwati Maka, and I am a first-year medical student at the John A. Burns School of Medicine here in Hawaii, and I am interested in surgery. Who else? Talia, do you want to go?
Hi, and good morning, everyone. My name is Talia Rivera, and I am from Guam, currently living in the United States, and definitely in the prerequisite area of life. I have a degree elsewhere, and I found out it wasn't what I wanted to do. And so I'm slowly switching to healthcare and medicine. And so I applied to Portland State University and Portland Community College at the moment and working out my school schedule from there.
Awesome, welcome. Anthony, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Oh, hi, you guys can hear me, right?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Anthony. I'm a freshman at UH Manoa. I'm a biochem major, and I'm just here just because I'm interested in pre-med.
Awesome, welcome. Thanks for joining us. Let's see who else is with us. Dewey, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Sure, can you hear me okay?
Yep.
I'm Chewy. I'm a non-traditional student. I have a degree in respiratory therapy. I'm just going back to school to get into medical school, so I'll be starting in the summer.
Awesome. And then Nohea, would you like to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, my name's Nohea Bauni. I'm from West Valley City, Utah, currently attending USU, and I'm interested in surgery, mostly neurology. So that's me.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. We'll go ahead and get started. So Ciala, you want to go ahead and take over?
Sure. Cool. Bear with me as we do this. Cool. So like Kenny said, this is like a very broad overview and that we're not going to get into like a ton of the specifics. We just want you to have a lot of these things on your radar. But if you have questions, you're always welcome to reach out to us because we're here to help. We know what it's like. We were just like in everyone's shoes, like your shoes, not that long ago. And so we know that this can be like a stressful and kind of lonely journey as you're trying to navigate this by yourself. So we're here to help with whatever you need us to help with. And so even if we don't cover what exactly like you want to talk about today, you're always welcome to shoot us an email or anything like that. So we'll just get started. So applying med school, you can do it. We've done it. And if you've heard some of our stories, like a lot of us are not traditional and it was a long journey. So we want you to all know there's a place in medicine for you. So this is a little overview roadmap of kind of as you get closer to the application, what it looks like. This is like an ideal roadmap that gives you kind of a brief timeline. It kind of looks overwhelming and stuff, and not everyone's going to do this perfectly. So don't feel like you have to match this perfect, but this is just to help give you like a general idea of everything. And so I took this from the University of Utah Pre-Med resource website. So I've put the link at the bottom if you ever want to access it yourself. And I've tried to include the links as we go along if you ever want to look at these things like on your own. And we'll talk more about that later, but this is just kind of a map. Feel free, we'll go through it like each individual thing. So next is MCAT. So I am not sure if any of you have actually like looked at the application, but the platform that you apply through is called MCAT, so the double AMC. And so this is the platform that you will use to like submit your primary application. And this is what most medical schools here in the US use. And we're gonna go down and we're gonna break down like different parts of the MCAS application. So like I said, this is some of the brief overview of what it is. So this will have the MCAT, coursework, your work and activities, letter of evaluation, personal statement and essays, the med schools that you choose to apply to, secondary applications, interviews, and then we're gonna talk about resources. So we're gonna break down each of these things. First is the MCAT. This is probably the worst part about applying to medical school. It's a standardized test, it's multiple choice, and it kind of assesses all your knowledge from your entire like undergraduate career, but it also assesses like your critical thinking and how you solve problems and what your reading level is and stuff. And so, yeah, like it's a mixture of a lot of things, natural, behavioral, social science concepts and principles that are prereqs to study medicine. And then you can find info about the MCAT, AMCAS on those links below. And at the end, we're going to talk about like different resources and stuff, because this is often like the biggest barrier for many of our Pacific Islander students to get to medical school. So the MCAT has 4 sections. It's a long test, but it's broken down into biology, biochem stuff, chemistry, physics, and then there's a psych portions, psych, social, behavioral stuff, and then CARS. This is pretty much like reading comprehension stuff. So this is like a very brief overview of it. You can get more info. They did like adjust it a little during COVID, but I think they've gone back to like the full on thing. And we'll talk more about like how it's graded probably like in a later workshop, but you get your score based on the percentile of how you perform compared to other people in the country who take the exact same exam on that day. And when you apply, so these are MCAT test dates. So the column on the left that tells you like the day that like you take the MCAT exam, and then the column on the right tells you when your score is released. And that's important when you're like applying, if you're trying to like set up if you want like to know your scores by a certain date so you can submit to schools and stuff. But here's like a schedule of what it looks like. Even if you're not close, just know it's administered January through September, and then different schools have deadlines for what's the deadline of the last MCAT score date take, they'll accept. So sometimes people will take it early spring, and if they don't like their score, then they'll take it again later as they study. But yeah, this is a whole nother thing. We just want you to be like aware of it. The next thing is coursework. So in order to apply to med school, you have to have a bachelor's degree or above before you can apply, or you have to have it before starting med school. So that's why a lot of people will apply like during their junior year going into their senior year. But you have to have at least a bachelor's degree to apply or to start medical school. And something that's kind of a myth is a lot of people think you have to like major in biochem or chemistry or biology, but you don't have to. You can major in anything you want. I have classmates who have majored in Spanish, economics, business, but you just have to be sure that you complete the prerequisite coursework, which we're gonna have on the next page. So it's going to kind of vary by medical school, but all in all, schools will require 1 year of general chem, 1 year of OChem, 1 year of physics in the labs, and 1 year of biology in the lab, and then a semester of biochemistry. And when I say 1 year, it means like 2 semesters. So like you take the first part of general chemistry in the lab during the fall, and then the second part during your spring semester. And that can be done in like any order, no specific order, but these are usually the minimum requirements depending on the school. And so we'll get in more about like when you're selecting schools, making sure that you know that you have the prereqs to be able to apply to that school. Next is work and activities. So we saw a lot of people ask questions like, how can I boost my application? And so sometimes things like GPA, those things are sometimes hard to change, and sometimes things like MCAT score, like that's sometimes a little more difficult to improve or to change. And so this is like one way you can really shine. And this is a way a lot of schools will evaluate. This is their holistic evaluation to know if you're going to be a good doctor or whatever. And so this can include extracurricular activities like medical stuff, like if you work as a scribe, CNA, or if you work and it's not even related to medicine, you can still use that, volunteer work, internships. And what's important is as you're doing these experiences, you need to be able to like write and reflect on them. So in a way, it kind of doesn't matter what activities you pick as long as you love them and it's something that you can speak to in your application process. So some examples of work and activities, the first one's hobbies. So if you have something that you're really passionate about, like if you're an athlete or if you like writing or anything, any hobby, like your musical, these are things that have made you who you are. And schools want to see that you're a human, that you're not a robot, and that you do things outside of school. And so they want to see well-rounded students because it's a lot to balance medicine and your other things going on in your life. So recreational activities like athletics, other pastimes that help you relieve stress and return refreshed to your studies in both undergrad and mid school. Next is leadership experience. So obviously as a physician, you serve as like a leader on your team, but often like we think like, oh, I need to have this like crazy leadership experience, but it doesn't need to be a big thing. I like the different things it says. Just your committee work, leadership in church stuff, coordinating a project. It can be like big things and it can be little things. It doesn't have to be anything super formal, but they like to see that you know how to lead a team. Next, community service. So obviously as like a physician, you're going in because you want to help people. And so in order to prove that, you need to show that you're doing stuff to help people even before you get to med school. And so it's important to volunteer and show that you have a commitment to serving your community. And that can be done in a lot of ways. There's not one way to do that. And we're going to have a list of like ideas on how you can volunteer and stuff that you can look at. Patient exposure. So I know this is like, you'll hear a lot of people who do like they're a CNA or they're a scribe or they're an MA. Those are like great ways to get patient exposure, but those aren't the only way. You can volunteer in an ER, a nursing home, hospice, but this is something like a lot of, like some schools will require it, like my school required it when I applied, but it will depend, but schools like to often like see that you've had some sort of interaction with patients in the past. Last, well, for me is physician shadowing. So you probably have heard of people who shadow. This has been kind of messed up because of COVID, but medical schools like you to see that they like you to be exposed to this profession because it's such like a long process, long career, that they want to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into. And so they suggest that you shadow physicians. Some schools used to require it, like my school required it, but they did away with it because of COVID, because it's difficult to get in. But I think it's a really good like learning experience to see, to like ensure that this is something you actually want to do and that you'll like it, or it gives you the chance to like explore specialties and figure out what you would like to do. So, and I know some of the questions that were asked when people submitted on the Google form that they wanted to, or they needed help shadowing. We can talk about that at the end, but next, Kenny's gonna take over.
Awesome, thanks, Yale. So everything that's done in medicine is based on research. So one thing that medical schools are really looking for is, your ability to understand and keep up to date with like the most recent literature. So they want to know that you can, read through different research articles and be able to understand, and critically, I guess, think about what the research is presenting. And so I know for myself, at least, and what I've heard from a lot of other Pacifica under pre-med students, research experience can seem really intimidating. And it's like, where do I even start? Like, how do I like reach out to a research mentor and get involved? But one thing that I do want to, just point out is there's a lot of different ways to do research. You don't just have to be, a clinical researcher. You don't have to be, studying cancer cells in a wet lab. One of the things that I really enjoyed doing before medical school and now even during medical school is community-based research. And so working with, Pacific Islander community-based organizations to better understand what our community needs are through surveys, and then working together to create different, initiatives to address whatever we identify in these surveys. That's research. And so, don't discount those things. Those things are just as important as the other types of research, and things that medical schools will definitely appreciate as well. And we can talk about more of our research experiences later on. Next slide, please. Next is letters of evaluation. Once again, another topic of mine that was like kind of a big obstacle. One thing that I recommend, and our future workshops will definitely be going a little bit more in depth with how to like approach different professors. But when you're taking your courses, one of the key things to remember is you're there to learn, but you're also there to kind of like build a relationship, I guess, with your professor, which for me was always intimidating. But you want to do well on the courses and really get to know your professors so that they can write, really detailed letters of evaluation or letters of recommendation that speak to your character, that speak to, your academic excellence in their courses that you took with them. So your letters of evaluation are a big part of your application, just as much as, your personal statement, your research experiences. And I forget the exact breakdown, and I think it's probably changed since I applied to medical school, but it's usually around like 3 to 4 different letters of evaluation from different types of, maybe one from a professor whose course you did well in, one from research, one from maybe your pre-med counselor or advisor if they have that at your school. But definitely something that you want to start thinking about earlier rather than later. Next slide, please. Your personal statement. This is really an opportunity for you to introduce yourselves before the interview to all the different medical schools that you're applying to. They look at your works and activities and your hobbies and your coursework, and that's all great. Your GPA and your MCAT. But this is really the first opportunity that they get a glimpse into like who you are as a person and what's important to you. And this is kind of really your opportunity to tell your story, and why you're so interested and passionate about medicine. And so it's just similar to letters of rec. It's definitely not one of those things that you want to wait until the end to kind of think about. But some of the important questions to consider when you're writing your personal statement are why you're interested in medicine, what motivates you to learn more about medicine, and what do you want medical schools to know about you that hasn't been disclosed in other sections. And so that's kind of what I was talking about, is you really want to not just repeat things that they can, gather from your other essays that you're writing, or from looking at your transcript. This is an opportunity for you to really stand out. Next slide. So medical schools, specifically selecting what medical schools to apply to, is kind of a big decision, based depending on what you want to do with your career in the future. You definitely want to go to a school that will help you prepare for your career. But also finances is kind of a big obstacle when it comes to applying to medical schools, because each of the applications that you submit to each individual medical school costs a certain amount of money. And so each medical school also has different requirements, even though there is one primary application like Ciela was talking about, which you submit through MCAS. It's your responsibility as an applicant to really understand the specific requirements for the schools that you're interested in. And so a lot of schools will have, on their school websites, all of this information available. But one really useful tool that I found that AMCAS has started is it's called MSAR. I forget what it stands for, but we can share the link with you guys in the chat at the end. But it's basically just this database with all this information, statistics about all these different schools, what the requirements are, what the applicants who were admitted in this upcoming cycle were, what the demographic breakdown looks like. Are there any NHPI, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander students attending the school? Really, it has all the information you need about each medical school. And so you're able to really, look if this is a school that you feel like you'd be qualified to attend, if your application can kind of get you in the door. Next slide. So after you submit your primary applications, you'll start hearing back from the schools that you applied to, and they'll ask you more questions. So your personal statement is kind of the first essay, but all the schools will ask you more questions to kind of get to know you more, which a lot of the times, if you get a secondary application, it's a good sign because the school is interested in you. But also be aware that some schools just submit secondary applications to all their applicants. And so, you don't necessarily have to complete all your secondary applications to all the schools if you're not seriously interested in the school, because each secondary application costs like $80 to $100+. And so that can really add up really quickly. So really give thought to the secondary applications you're getting and say, like, do I really want to go to this school? Do I really feel like I could fit in here and it could help me accomplish my career goals in the future? But some of the common questions or topics that they cover in the questions that they ask you revolve around diversity, overcoming specific challenges in your life, if you've taken any gap years, and then the dreaded question, is there anything else that we need to know about you? And a lot of the questions are like recycled through the different schools. You'll notice there's a pattern, so you can kind of just reformat your essays, but it is pretty draining. So if you're like applying to, let's say, just 20 schools, and all those schools get back to you with your secondary applications, on average, they have like 3 to 4 essays to write. And so it can be really, really tiresome. Next slide, please. And then after you've submitted your secondary applications, if a school really likes you and really wants to meet you, then you'll hear back from them about an interview. And so there's two main kind of interviews, what we call a traditional interview, where you sit down and you meet with, faculty, and have like an interview for a job essentially, and they kind of just get to know you more. Or it'll be a multiple mini interview, or an MMI, where you have, they have multiple different stations. At my school that I interviewed at UCSD, there was 8 different stations. Each of these different stations had a different scenario or a different question that you would basically read when you went to that station. You'd have 2 minutes to prepare. you go into the room and then have 8 minutes to kind of discuss the question and your answer. So really, they really want to see how you think on your feet, and just another opportunity to kind of get to know you better. And so for both of these, it's important. Although the schools, if you hear back from a school regarding an interview, they already love you, your foot's already in the door. So go into the interview with confidence, because they basically want to just make sure you're a decent, normal person, and that you would fit with their school. But definitely prepare for your interviews. That's really important. Hopefully in the future, we can start conducting mock interviews with you all. We'd love to do that to help you prepare and kind of give you feedback on how to do your best. Excuse me. Next slide. And so one of the most important resources that I unfortunately was not aware of when I was applying to medical school is the fee assistance program. I would highly recommend that you all look into this to see if you qualify, but they basically provide large discounts for your applications. They provide you a discount for your MCAT even. They provide up to a certain number of free applications to what was it, 15 schools, was it, CLA? 20, okay. Yes, they provide 20, you can apply to 20 schools for free, which is amazing. And you can apply to the fee assistance program for up to 5 years. So definitely worth looking into. It saves you a lot of money. And then our last slide. These are just some important dates to remember for the upcoming cycle, and just to kind of be prepared for when the application's open. You want to be able to have all of your things ready when the application opens, so you can submit as soon as possible. You can submit later, but you do kind of short yourself some opportunities if you do that. So always try to be prepared and be aware of these upcoming dates. And so, yeah, those are kind of the slides that we wanted to go over with you all today. We know that you all submitted some questions when you were registering as well. So we wanted to, take some time to address some of those in addition to any other questions that you guys want to drop in the chat. And then the other thing that I wanted to do if we had time is, go over some of these different areas of the application, and maybe, Ciala and Piwati and I can share some of our experiences with like physician shadowing. What did that look like for us? Or research, what did that look like for us? So that you guys kind of get an idea of what you can do. So, excuse me. The first question that we have is, how can I increase my chance at medical school if/when I have a low GPA in my undergraduate? So I know that Ciala had kind of touched on this earlier. I don't want you to think that your GPA is, making or breaking your application to medical school. Moving forward, at medical school admissions are really looking for really well-rounded applicants. And so it's important that, if you have a low GPA, make sure that the other aspects of your application are really strong, like your research, your working experience, your personal statement. Those things can help recover, a GPA that you feel is not the strongest. Ciala, Piwati, did you have any other insight?
Like, I had friends who are actually in med school, classmates now. They did post-bac classes, like they took more science classes to try to get their science GPA up. It's expensive and it's not fun to like take extra classes, but sometimes that is like some things people have to do, but it works and people get in after doing that too. So
Yeah, I don't really have much else to add because I am one of those people who did a post-bac. And I think there's definitely a lot of programs that may fit for students that aren't as expensive. Definitely, if you're not looking at a master's, there are cheaper options for post-bacs. And I think just noting that like the GPA is more like a cutoff, like for it's kind of a screening method. So there are hopefully other ways that you can kind of there are definitely a lot of schools that can still kind of accommodate for that, but I think it definitely relies on a lot of like GPA, MCAT scores for just the screening.
and we didn't like put specific values, but like don't think you need like a 4.0 to go to med school. Like as long as you hit the minimum for a school, like that's all that matters. Like Piwati said, it's a screening tool to get you in the door, but that's not like what makes or breaks if you get accepted to a school.
Yeah, and that MSAR, Ciala, do you mind posting that link into the chat? That MSAR tool that I was talking about when you're looking at these different medical schools will have their minimum requirements if they do. Some schools don't have one. Our next question, it's a non-trad question. Where did your experiences as a non-traditional student influence your applications to medical school the most? That's a good question. So non-traditional basically means that you didn't apply directly from college and you start medical school after graduating. But being a non-traditional student, I mean, depending on what you're doing during the time that you're, working on applying to medical school, I guess is what would be contributing to your application. So, just because you're not going straight into medical school from college, don't think that that discounts you either. There are a lot of my classmates who have taken several years off, who have considered other programs or done masters or even done PhDs before they applied to medical school. Or people who have just, were married, were working, had kids, and it wasn't the right time, and then they decided they wanted to come back. But there's an opportunity in each of the parts of the applications that we talked about for you to really, talk about your experiences. And I think at the end of the day, it really just comes down to what we were talking about, just being a well-rounded applicant. And your personal statement is a great opportunity to talk about your non-traditional path to medical school as well.
Lots of my classmates are really similar to Kenny. Like they didn't go straight from like undergrad, like they wanted to do other things too. They wanted to travel, they wanted to work in a field, or they just really wanted to be sure they wanted to go into medicine. So a lot of people use that time just to explore and really make sure this is what they want to do. You just have to be able to speak, like you just have to explain yourself, like what you were doing during that time and like why it was meaningful that you weren't just like chilling, hanging out and stuff. Because a lot of times medical schools will ask you what you did like from the time you graduated until you applied. But I think like a lot of my classmates are considered non-traditional, and that's like what can make an applicant who they are the time like after school or whatever. So it can work in your favor if you frame it the right way.
Our next question is, well, we had a couple of questions of people asking any specific volunteer opportunities to kind of build, your resume, and any like Pacific Island or specific opportunities. And so I know CL and Buet have worked hard to create like a document that we'll be sharing after, with just some opportunities that you can look into. I would also say if you're looking for specific like Pacific Islander opportunities, the best way that I found to get involved in those, and they're always looking for, volunteers, interns, even workers, if you want to be a community health worker, just look into community-based organizations or Pacific Islander community-based organizations in your area. And whatever ones that pop up, honestly, just shoot them an email, let them know who you are. And then you can look for health specific ones if you'd like to. And I was able to get an internship that way with a Pacific Islander specific community-based organization. But they're always willing to help us. They're always looking for help. And I think once again, it really helps boost your application when they see that you're involved with your community and helping and volunteering and doing community service like Ciala was talking about.
Something I see like people in this call may not be at that point and stuff, but like with applications, people will write a long essay about how much they love their community and how much they love helping their community. But when you go look at their volunteer, like never once have they volunteered with their community. So there can like admissions committees see that right away, and they can tell like that's a large disconnect. So whatever you do, like just make sure it's all connected. It like if you say like I love community or I like helping women or I want to help in this community, just make sure your experiences, like your volunteering, like you're showing, yeah, I do love it because like that's what I do with my time off. And so that's a good way for you to figure out like where to volunteer. You want your volunteering to be meaningful so that you can write about it in your essays and that you can prove like you can back up your words. You're not just talking stuff. And so, but yeah, like Kenny said, there's a lot of like opportunities to help in our community. We try to post like whenever we we are aware of things. So like, I know it sounds dumb, but yeah, watch our Instagram page because like we post often, and then we will share like a link with you for some local organizations, like if you're in Utah or something, to reach out.
Well, that's a really good point, Ciela. Thanks for bringing that up. And that just reminds me, with your letters of rec too. So if your personal statement, you're talking about your community, and your letters of rec don't really line up with that, you want to probably get a letter of rec from a community member or someone like that you've interned for or something to really reflect that and speak to that experience. Okay. Our next question is best essay topics. So I'm assuming this is for the personal statement. I think we had listed kind of the general framework. Yeah, when I was applying, I didn't really know too much about the MCAT. And so I thought that they would just have like a prompt or something. And the secondary applications usually do have prompts. So that's a little bit easier, like what to write about. But with a personal statement, like I said, I think kind of one of the driving or central questions is like, why medicine? Why do you want to be a doctor? And how does your story, kind of, what has been your story to this path? Or like, what's your path look like, essentially? I think that would kind of be my biggest advice for essay topic, or how to frame your personal statement.
I think I would just add that kind of something that I've been seeing in a lot of essays that I review is just, I guess, not realizing that when people put together their statement, it doesn't necessarily tell their own stories. And I think for Pacific Islanders, a lot of our motivation comes from like our family, our communities, our ancestors, all of that, and we kind of like internalize it, and that's what we want to write about. And I think that's like amazing, that's great, it's kind of like who we are. But at the end of it, or at the end of the day, you kind of end up with an essay that tells you more about your family history, or like, and it doesn't necessarily tell you about like yourself, and kind of like just like, I don't know how to explain it, but just like those things. And it's just kind of keeping in mind that if at the end of that essay, I don't necessarily understand like the things that you as a student have gone through, what you've learned, or like, just like, yeah, just I think sometimes at the end of it, I just don't know anything about the person themselves, but I know more about their family. So I think that's just one thing to keep in mind when we as Polynesians kind of try to write our personal statement. um, I think like, I've seen essays where it can be done well. I think you just need to find a way to transition into a more introspective type of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, building off of what Piwati said is, and two, it has to answer the question of why medicine. So a lot of times I read like, well, I want to help people. You can help people by being a teacher. You can help people by being a firefighter. You can help people through even being a nurse. So you need to be able to tell them why exactly you want to be a physician, and why medicine, and use those things. Like if you're going to use your family, but make sure it's all connected. Like again, with the community thing, if you're going to speak to your community, you're going to speak to helping your family or whatever, that all needs to be demonstrated not only in your personal statement, but the rest of your application and stuff. And so it's all connected. And a lot of times I see personal statement and then I see experiences, and like none of it connects, and none of it can really speak to why specifically medicine. And so I don't think there's a best essay topic, but you have to make sure you're framing it correctly and you can back it up with the rest of your application, and it gives you a chance to tell more about yourself. So
Awesome. Those are all the questions that were submitted when people registered. Did any of you have any specific questions that you wanted to ask us? Or were there any, you can feel free to unmute yourself, or you can drop your question in the chat. Or were there any parts of the presentation that we went over, like work and activities, hobbies, leadership experience, community service, patient exposure, physician shadowing, that you wanted us to share our experiences about?
I do, for one, if that's okay. Patient exposure, especially during COVID, it's pretty much, you'll find all the doctors saying, stay home. We don't want you in the hospital. We don't want you anywhere near this. For instance, currently I have a full-time job working with a senior care facility as their COVID coordinator. But that doesn't necessarily, I don't think, give me the right patient exposure. How is it to transition into any position that's, currently available that can give that patient exposure?
I think Ciala kind of also answered. I would say that counts. And I think I think in the beginning when I was first like doing like that whole patient exposure, trying to get some of that, it doesn't necessarily have to be like in person or doing like clinical, like taking blood pressure or whatever. I think in the beginning, a lot of it was like I was doing like just phone calls for like patient stuff, and every like little thing like that kind of counts because like communicating over the phone with patients. And then it just like as time went on, I just progressed and I was like a receptionist, and all I did was like just like help take patients in. And I think like when you're looking at experiences, I think also the way you can kind of frame things can kind of help. Like I didn't necessarily do a lot of super heavy clinical things, but I was in an office, or like I was kind of working like around like the edges of like medicine, and you still learn things, and you can still write about things that you've seen, or write about things that maybe like that kind of like affected you just in that aspect. Because I think when it comes to medicine, everyone plays a role, and I think that that's something that like is super valuable, no matter what you do. And I will say for current applicants, at least for JAVSUM, we're they're definitely being a lot more understanding in regards to that, and I think for most schools, especially.
Oh, go Kenny. I'll
No, you
go.
go ahead, Ciala.
No, I like for a lot of mine, I was like a hospice volunteer and I just like hung out with them. Like I wasn't doing anything medical related. I was literally just talking to them. And like, as long as you can speak to that in your application, like they want to see, do you have communication skills? How are you at the bedside? Like, but it doesn't need to be like medical, if that makes sense. So I think what you're doing counts.
Absolutely. I was also a receptionist, Piwati, in a surgeon's office. I also helped schedule appointments for imaging and also for their surgeries. Spoke to insurance, companies to try to like get things covered. But what they're really looking for is just a meaningful human interaction. I think they say patient exposure, but they really just want to know that you can, like, did you have a meaningful experience that like made you want to pursue medicine, and you have a good bedside manner type of thing. And while you can, be a receptionist or what do they call it, a scribe, in an ER or something, and get patient exposure that way, you can. Your family members are also patients. Taking your aunt to the doctor and being able to, help her understand her medications and the treatment and stuff like that. I spoke. One of the big experiences for me was my aunt who passed away, but she spent some time with my family, and I kind of helped conduct her visits and help translate, not translate, but help make things easier for her to understand. And that was in my personal statement, and so I think that also speaks to patient exposure as well. But I will say, like working in a doctor's office as a receptionist, a surgery scheduler, or whatever, does I think double as like patient exposure, but also like physician shadowing as well. So if you can like knock out more birds with one stone, I think that would be better as well. But they're like, you can be creative. Like it doesn't have to be like cut, there's only one way to do this, cookie cutter. But great question, Talia. Go ahead, Ciala.
Sorry, just one last thing. Remember, everyone is in the same boat, like with COVID. So like med schools know that when you apply, like they understand like the challenges about like getting in. So this is a good way to show like I was creative and I went way out of my way to like find a way, and schools are gonna like that. So
I think the next question was about how did we prepare for the MCAT? I don't know if you guys want to speak to that, just because I personally did not prepare the way you probably should have. So
Yeah, I can share my experience. Not to say that it's the right way to do it, and like what they said, it's going to be different for everybody. If you can like self-study, that's great. I'm not a self-studier. So what I had to do is I enrolled in a like prep course. It's a local one. It wasn't Kaplan or any of those. It was a local one in near UCLA, and it was a lot of money. So that is definitely one of the disadvantages to the prep courses. There's a lot of scholarships available though. to cover some of those costs. And fingers crossed in the future, we'll be able to help some of our pre-med students with that as well. But I found it very useful. My instructor not only helped teach us the material, but he also did a lot of counseling, which was really nice. You know, I would tell him like my stats and stuff like that, and he'd kind of give me some recommendations. And then I think even before thinking about preparing for the MCAT, I think the best way to prepare is to do well in your courses, especially the ones that are going to be covered in the MCAT. Make sure that you're doing your best during your courses so that when you're preparing for the MCAT, you know, those couple weeks or months before, you're not learning things for the first time.
Yeah, I'm like queen of like memorize and dump it. So try to like break that habit before like right away, because you're gonna need a lot of those science things so you don't have to relearn them for the MCAT. But I did a prep course too, but if you're from Utah or anyone on this call, if you're from Utah, the University of Utah does this thing called the Summer MCAT Scholars Program. And if you're a student from an underrepresented community, they will provide you a stipend. It's a summer program that starts in like May or June. So they'll pay for you to take in Kaplan MCAT course, and then they'll provide like a stipend. It's not like a ton of money, but it's something like so that maybe that will help ease some of the finances. And then they give you like a ton of like question banks and like books and prep stuff. So I dropped a link in the chat of ones that we're aware of, and like we'll keep looking. So feel free to look at that, because there are like scholarship ways, and then like even discounts and stuff. So if that's something like you're looking for, reach out to us and let us know if we can help you. Oh, but last thing I wanted to say is, if I could go back and retake the MCAT, I would have said focus less on content review and do more practice questions. So I spent a lot of time like watching YouTube and like looking at my resource books, but it would have been better had I been like doing questions and reviewing content as I did questions. So that's something like to keep in mind as you're putting together a schedule.
Yeah, I think I was just gonna say like the same thing, Ciala, and I think that's how I study for like exams now in med school. I do more practice problems, and I think that just helps because like when you end up reviewing your practice problems later, like you end up like just learning a lot of like things that like you might have missed in your actual studying. And I think like I always tell everyone this, but like studying the correct answers that you get right are just as important as studying all the ones that you get wrong. So it's literally going through and like studying everything, and it's so much more useful. And I think that's something I also picked up in my post-bac. And I didn't do a prep course, but I think like that's one thing that I will recommend. I recommend to anyone who is going in to apply. I think it's just a lot more structure. And I think even for myself, I'm very like organized and diligent about like my time, but it's still like there's just certain things that you can be done better when you're in an actual course.
Yeah, I'll say as well that like if I were to go back and take the MCAT again, I would have focused. I would have taken it more seriously. I know that's something that I should have from the get-go. Obviously, you're applying to medical school, but the reason why I say that is because you're building test-taking skills like before starting medical school that are going to serve you well when you start medical school. So like really learn how to take standardized tests. And I really don't like standardized tests, and I don't know why we have them, but that's another story. But like the board exams that you'll be taking in medical school and after medical school are just like the MCAT. They're a big part of it is just you know, analyzing your test taking skills in addition to like your knowledge base. So be sure that you're taking time, and the best way to do that is like how CL and Bioeti were saying, is to do practice problems. And one thing that I've learned as well is to do a more targeted approach when you're studying. Don't just say, these are all the things I need to cover. As long as I cover them, then I'll be good for the MCAT. Really understand what your weaknesses are and spend extra time, you know, on those areas. And then you'll see the most improvement in your scores that way as well. Any other questions? Those are great questions. or any other experiences from the application that you wanted us to talk about or share our experiences on?
Sorry, I did. Yes, actually.
Don't
Um,
apologize.
was there anything during your guys' journey? It could have been anything that a board member, a senior doctor, or somebody commented on that was probably the best thing they saw or best thing for you during that journey. Let's say you answered a question and it was like the best answer they heard coming out of your mouth during this interview, something along those lines.
I'm trying to rack my brain to remember. That was a long time ago for me. But specifically from like other doctors or other healthcare workers, um, if I'm being quite honest, I would have to say probably not for me. I think a lot of like what was core to my application was just my family and my community, and just kind of the disparities or the differences and the disadvantages that I saw in my community compared to white people, and that's kind of what inspired me to pursue medicine. But I can't think of anything now specifically. But if I do, I'll reach out to you. With your Ciela, did you guys have any specific things?
Kind of, I don't know if this is exactly what you're looking for. So one with like my letters of rec, like with professors. So I wasn't like a straight A student, but I spent a lot of time in my professors' offices, like asking for help. And like I wasn't the top of my class, but like I knew my professors loved me because I would go in and I would ask questions. And so they wrote me like great letters of recommendation for that. So just seeing like effort, professors love effort and they love people who want to be successful because they want to help us be successful. So that was like key for me in getting good letters of rec from my professors. When I read my letter of rec from my like physician, usually they're all screened and like you can never see them, but it was like random that I got to read one. She spoke to like how like I was shadowing over like my holiday break and stuff, and like how that spoke volumes to her, like while my classmates were like off spending time with their family, like I was in the hospital, I was shadowing, and she was like impressed with my communication skills, not with her, but with the patients. And so I don't know like maybe if that answers your question and stuff, but it's probably just like the little things that you do, the way like if you show up on the weekend or like your day off or something, or the way that you communicated with the patient, or you sat with like the kids of, I don't know, it's like little things, probably nothing like major that there's like any secret. But.
Yeah, I'm not really sure. I think for me, whenever I was actually similar. I became very close friends with my professors to the point where they would invite me over to dinner and hang out and do stuff with them. But that's just because I tend to go into office hours, and then I'm also a talker. So then eventually that leads to something. So I think there's something useful in going into office hours, and you can kind of just develop a relationship organically. Um, and then I think like my letters of recs from like professionals, I don't know, I have like this, I think I just tend to be a workaholic. So it kind of just works out for like people, like they just end up liking people who want to work all the time with them. And it's just like, it kind of just worked out. So I think just be yourself, and I feel like everyone finds stuff to like. I don't think it's necessarily like one specific thing, because I think what one physician likes about me, probably another physician wouldn't have appreciated it. So it really just depends.
No, that was all helpful. Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question, Talia. And the last one that we had before we wrap up is from about how do we look for medical schools we applied for. So that MSAR tool, I'll post it again in the chat right now if you want to get that before we end the meeting, is a really useful tool to look at all the different medical schools, what their specific requirements are. And like I said, they also have what the statistics for the people who were most recently admitted, what those look like, what their MCAT scores were, what their research experiences look, how many years, and so forth and so on. But also, I think when thinking about where to apply to, I thought about like where I wanted to be, like near family and stuff like that, locations that you'd want to be in. And then also think about like if you kind of know what you want to do in the future, look at schools where like graduates typically go into that program, if that makes sense. So if you want to be a surgeon, for example, if the MSAR is a great tool for this as well, what do their graduating students go into? And if a lot of them are surgeons, then that probably means that they have a good surgical program or clerkship program that will help you, become a better applicant when you apply for residency. Sorry. My cat's feeding time.
So I didn't follow the whole timeline that I showed you at the beginning. And so I took the MCAT at the end of August and I submitted my application like the night before the deadline closes. Don't ever do that. So for me, I had to be like very targeted in my approach of like which schools, one, do I have a shot at? And then two, like fall into like things Kenny said, am I going to be close to family? And then the other big thing for me was like, can I do work like in the Pacific Islander community if I go to this school, because like that's what I want to do. And so I only applied to 5 schools and stuff. So, but they will tell you like some of your pre-med advisors, they'll tell you like the average is like 15 to 20 schools to apply to. You can do that because it does like increase your chances, but you don't have to. It really depends.
I think also I was pretty strategic in certain ways. I applied to just schools that like I felt like, I think like they always say like have your dream schools, your target schools, which are kind of like more in reach, and then your safety schools. For me, I think because I was just trying like a bunch of schools where I felt like I just matched a lot of their demographics. So that kind of, I don't know if it really worked, but it definitely made me feel a lot better than just, especially when you have limited resources. So I think that's for me what one of the biggest things. And I think also what I considered was like how many out-of-staters they were willing to take. So if you're from Hawaii, we only have JABSUM, which also, depending on, even at JABSUM, depending on what school college you go to, can actually make a big impact on like what you apply. I think there's like this running joke that like if you went to the University of Hawaii and you're applying to JAPSUM, it's kind of you're kind of a rare species because there aren't a lot of University of Hawaii students at JAPSUM. And I think there's like a change to kind of make things a little bit better. But I know like a lot of them are in-staters that went away for college. But I just kind of looked at like what each school's like class was, and it does go back to like MSAR, going on to their website and looking at like how many percentage of students come from out of state, and a lot of that are going to be, if they're taking bigger populations of out of staters, there's going to be a lot of private schools, which also have their own different things. So for Hawaii kids, kind of just, I think that's one thing to kind of look at.
Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today and for your great questions. Hopefully you all found our presentation useful and we were able to answer some of your questions. We are doing these monthly workshops because we really want them to be helpful to you. So please feel free to email us or message us on Instagram or Facebook if you feel like there's something that we can do to help be more helpful to you guys, or if there's topics you want us to discuss, please, we would really appreciate your feedback. But thank you all for joining us again today. If you have questions or emails, polynesiansinmedicine@gmail.com. We'll be posting this recording if you want to reference it on YouTube, and then you can reach out to us on our social media platforms, Facebook and Instagram. Otherwise, keep an eye out for our next workshop next month. Enjoy your weekend, everyone.